In many cases, what we see, millions of people are becoming climate refugees. They have to leave their homes. We need to do some ways to buy time until the decarbonization is done. And we are proposing climate interventions to cool the planet or cool certain parts, vulnerable parts, immediately, or provide resources R&D to get prepared for the situation that is coming, even worse than what we see today.
Welcome to ClimateGenn. My name is Nick Breeze. In this episode, I'm speaking with Dr. Soumitra Das from the Healthy Climate Initiative. Soumitra sheds light on the life-threatening challenges that face citizens in India and surrounding countries today. A major threat to life is when heat and humidity combine, known as wet bulb temperatures. This is when the body is unable to cool itself, leading to fatal heat strokes within a few hours. Today, 2% of India's population are exposed to wet bulb extremes. In a country nearing 1.5 billion people, 2% equates to around 30 million people. On the current trajectory, this figure is set to rise mid-century to 70%, or in real terms, in excess of 1 billion citizens at risk of heat stroke. The fossil fuel industry is the main culprit of this ongoing rise in temperatures, doing everything they can to slow the inevitable transition to clean, renewable energy. The impact on people's lives, infrastructure, biodiversity on land and in the oceans is incalculable. All of this is set against the needlessly worsening relations between humans around the world. New episodes include interviews with Professor Mark Maslin at UCL about the state of what the recent World Meteorological Organization's climate report tells us, and his views on whether we should be looking into methods to cool the Earth while we continue to try and reduce emissions. Thank you to all subscribers, members, commentators, and everyone who gets in touch. I am inundated with emails and requests to participate in the ClimateGenn project. Please do consider joining to support the project and to get access to more archive and forthcoming interviews. You can also order my book Cop Out, an account of my reporting from the UN climate conferences from COP21 in Paris 2015 to COP28 in Dubai in 2023. There is also a recent free 58-page ebook to download published in May 2025 called Into the Heat. It has guests Professor Jason Box and author and TV wine pundit Janet Wang as guests as we do a road trip across Alentejo in southern Portugal, looking at the inspirational work being undertaken to survive and thrive in the heat. Thank you again. Soumitra, it's great to see you. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today. We want to start by just talking about the global south in places like India. Can you give us an idea of what's being experienced today in terms of climate extremes, the frequency and the intensity?
Thank you, Nick, for giving me the opportunity to speak about India and our plan, how we can mitigate this risk that's occurring in India. So what is happening today? So you have to, if you give the bigger picture, then you need to take a look at that 1.4 billion population and relatively small place. Just to give you an example, India has 1.4 billion population, 4 times more than the US, but 1/3 of the size of the US. So it's a 12 times more density. So that's one thing you need to think about. So many people in a small place. The second part you need to think about 250 million people living within the 50 kilometers of the coastal line. That is something, and the sea level is rising, and people are at grave risk of inundation every year, and the future is very murky. And the third part is the heat waves, that what we have found last year, that 37 cities crossed 45 degrees Celsius. And with humidity, that means 55 degree to 65 degrees Celsius, a real fill that you'd have. And that is very difficult for people who do not have air conditioning in the country. And 90% of the people, homes, do not have air conditioning today. So think about that situation. The fourth part, which is often ignored in this conversation, is the glacial melt. If you know that we have the Himalayas in the north, which is called third pole, this is Asia's water tower, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Indus, and all the 10 mighty rivers of Asia that originate from this Himalayan glacier. And they are melting very fast, rapidly melting. And that causes huge flooding at the downstream and water crisis in the upstream. So to give you an example, about 40% of India's population is at great risk of not having clean water access by 2030. So say how many million people, maybe, huge number of people are involved in. So this is what is happening.
It sounds like sort of layers of complexity, which are all completely deadly in so many different ways. In terms of responding to things like the sea level rise that you're talking about, these sort of incredible hot temperatures, how does the societal response work now? How do you protect people as a society in India at the moment?
The water crisis in terms of lack of water, and on the other side is that flooding situation. There isn't really that much plan from the government to protect these people, except that they are in the path of the mitigation plan that you have. Government is doing the best, doing great job in putting up solar energies and the renewables, and they're doing on track. But doesn't help at the moment the heat waves as well as the water flooding crisis. So in many cases, what we see, millions of people are becoming climate refugees. They have to leave their homes. For example, just to give you an example, if you type ghost villages in Google, you'll find in the northern part of India, empty homes, all empty homes. You'll see the pictures of that. So that is what is happening throughout South Asia, India as well.
We tend to have quite a sort of optimistic view when we think of places like India, because you get things like technical excellence in digital services and things like this. So we tend to think that everything's sailing along rather well. But when you start looking at these impacts, and when a community gets hit, it's about the recovery. And once you get hit again, is there a material impact that you've noticed on how social development, economic development is impacted by these sort of succession and increased frequency, intensity of these impacts?
What I noticed, just to give you an example, when I used to be in Howrah Station, which is one of the busiest train stations in the world, 40 million passengers cross every day in Howrah. And last year, when I was there, I saw the train station was empty. It was in April, about 42 degrees Celsius with high humidity. It was very difficult for me I was taking a train. I never have seen Howrah Station. I have been going there for all my life, that empty. So think about 70% people are in the physical labor jobs, construction, agriculture, and whatnot, the fruit vendors and everything. I don't have to tell you that what the numbers are. I can see it myself, that what happens. So this is one thing I noticed that myself. Another thing I noticed, that monsoon used to come on time and would go in time. And the water will be controlled, meaning the rain will be controlled. There will be throughout this time, there will rain. But rarely there would be huge amount of gush of water and then no water for one time. It will be continuous rain. What I'm saying is for the agriculture in the cities to manage this rain well, and it was productive. Now, what I see in my own city, which is the northern part of India, northeast part of India, that monsoon will come little late. That's one thing. And second thing, I see something called rain bombs. You'll see suddenly huge amount of water, and then there is no water for a while. And the problem with that, agriculture-wise, to manage this amount of water, the city gets inundated in city, and that makes a huge problem for the infrastructure. My house gets flooded every year. That so we have two floors. The first floors get the water every year. We get that.
Gosh, I actually spoke to a colleague in India today, and he had to apologize for being a few hours late because of flooding. And it's a sort of almost routine that there's some sort of impact when we're communicating.
Since my middle school, I have been involved in, flood mitigation, working with different communities to provide flood relief in my city because it's flood prone. It's close to Bangladesh, but never have seen that the city underwater, that the city gets underwater, and you see that, the people, the miseries, the hospital, the main hospital was underwater, as you can think about the situation.
It's incredible. And you talk about these temperatures of over 40 degrees with very high humidity. These are killers, these sorts of conditions. It's such a poignant thing because these conditions are spreading further. And I don't think we're really grasping what you're saying, places like where I am now, for instance. But I want to pivot a little bit because you've released a national cooling policy plan. Can you give me an indication of what's in it? How does it work?
What we understand that government is doing their best to mitigate decarbonization. But again, India is a developing country, and it is not completely India's fault that this global warming, per capita wise, India's carbon footprint is very, very low compared to any other places. But because of our location, because we are close to the equator, and all other countries close to the lower latitude countries are having similar problem as India, not of their fault, but because of the situation we are in, carbon released by the global north, particularly, that we are facing this situation. So India is doing their best, but we need to understand that within 40 years, 50 years, that will not be able to decarbonize the world. It is not possible. Still, carbon emission is still rising. I think it's about 42 billion tons per year. Unbelievable. Even after Paris climate agreement in 2015, it is happening. So you understand the situation. So what do we do at this time? We need to do some ways to buy time until this decarbonization is done. And we are proposing climate interventions to cool the planet or cool certain parts, vulnerable parts, immediately, or provide resources R&D to get prepared for the situation that is coming, even worse than what we see today.
In terms of interventions, there are there's quite a few interventions that have been proposed, and I've interviewed quite a few people on different ones. What specifically do you see as viable in terms of your national cooling proposals?
We would, divide the whole interventions, that what we call that sunlight reflection methods, in two categories. One category is non-controversial, low risk, and ready for deployment. And that will solve immediate cooling issues for the people, particularly bottom of the pyramid people, to live, at least survive. It will provide a sustainable, outcome for them. And other side is more controversial side that has bigger impact in terms of lowering the temperature, but at the same time, it's not ready yet. So we asking the government to provide resources for R&D to create the governance, mitigate the risk for deployment, and get it ready. So two parts we need to do. And for the non-controversial low-risk place, you can think about surface albedo modification. And one of the companies we are working with, our organization working with, called MIR, they have reflectors, aluminum reflectors. You can put it on rooftop, public buildings which do not have air conditioning, for example, or even if you have air conditioning, and it has potential of lowering the in-building temperature, inside temperature by 7 degrees Celsius, and it is low cost. So this can be utilized for helping those people who do not have air conditioning. And even those people who have air conditioning, that can reduce the energy intensity for using the air conditioning. So this is something we are proposing. And there are other similar surface albedo modification techniques are there that we can utilize. And the third thing we are doing, and we are very much involved in this, is that how to reduce the melting of Himalayan glaciers. And we are working with Indian Institute of Technologies Indore and another organization called Bright Ice Initiative from the US, and started a trial in Chota Siguri Glacier in the Himalayas to show that our surface-made albedo modification solution can work. And we have, with limited data, it shows that our solution reduced melting by 58% compared to the control side.
Does this fall under the non-controversial intervention?
For surface albedo modification with rooftop and albedo enhancement, that is non-controversial area. Surface albedo modification for the Himalayan glacier, that could be controversial, but we are doing a very small scale trial and also using within the laws, Indian laws, that allows us to do that, and also evaluating any environmental assessment impact. So we are assessing any impact that can happen. So far, we have not found any. And the material we are using for modification is clay. It's a clay-based or silica-based, which is non-toxic, eco-friendly. So we do not expect any kind of impact on this. So do not see yet controversial. And that's why we are doing the trial, making sure that we do not do any harm before we do deployment. And that is our policy. First, not make any further harm.
On the more controversial side, are there any of the more often talked about interventions, such as solar radiation management, in terms of stratospheric injection or anything like that you're interested in or looking at?
We are looking into, before we go into stratospheric aerosol injection, we are more interested in marine cloud brightening, which has low risk, because if you put it in the atmosphere, some bad things happen, it can go away in 2 to 3 days, it impacts. So that is the lower risk side. On the other side is that it doesn't involve the whole planet. You can reduce temperature. Let us say my city, Kolkata or Malda, a small city it is getting too hot. I can reduce that temperature of that city. So this kind of techniques have lower risk, and we would look into that, but it's still controversial because we do not know the impact when we make Kolkata cooler, what is going to happen to the next city or, the other impact. So we need to have understanding first, the impacts of doing this, if there's unintended bad impacts are there or not. And if there are, how do we mitigate that? So this is something we are looking into and proposing the government to do a small-scale trial and find out if there are any impacts, and if there are, how to mitigate them.
So you are proposing open-air trials, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, we are doing simulation as well as open-air trial as
Okay.
it's ready.
And who's developing the kit for that sort of experimentation?
In India, I have not seen anyone involved in marine cloud brightening. For stratospheric aerosol injection, there are scientists I have met who are working but mostly on the simulation side, not on anything else. And also their evaluation how this is going to impact the monsoon or the drought of India. In fact, I went to this conference in Cape Town the last week, and we have met several of Indian scientists who are working on this, but on the simulation side. Globally, not many scientists, I would say, are working. I have met people from Lapland University. I met University of Cambridge. There is a lab, climate repair lab. They are very involved in this. I have been very close to working with these people. Also, people from Cornell University. I see scientists from there involved. But no, I would say more scientists should be working on this now, given that we already crossed 1.5 degrees Celsius on average temperature. And 2 degrees Celsius, most likely, or that the projection is 2030s, late 2030s or early 2040s. So we are crossing the limit that we have set for ourselves in Paris Climate Agreement.
What you've outlined is controversial in terms of it's very polarizing within the scientific expert community. And the UK government's just financed a whole range of trials, including open air experiments. And given the extreme impacts that you've already outlined, the fact that emissions are still rising, even if they're close to plateauing, we don't even know that. But if they were, we've still got a lot going on in the pipeline for us. How would you navigate this polarization? Because in reality, there's a good chance that these projects could be blocked by other scientists who say, no, we've got to concentrate on mitigation and so on. What would your response to them be?
Main question from the scientists and civil society or concern, I would say, that moral hazards. That is number one. Moral hazards come from that if you start working on finding this sort of solutions, they are too simple, easy to do, but they are not really the solution, actual solution. These are stopgap and it doesn't solve the problem. Their concerns is that if we start doing that, then we will be away from the actual solution. So fossil fuel companies will have a reason not to cut their emissions, not to reduce their use of fossil fuel. So that is the concern we have. On the other hand, our approach is that think about risk framework. Yes, you understand there is a risk of doing climate interventions, but also think about what is the risk of not doing it, not getting ready for it. And when I think about, let us say, India and other lower latitude countries, that many parts of the world was going to be unlivable because the temperature is going to exceed the what is called wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, which is the limit for human survivability. So beyond that, even if you are in the shade or anything, people are going to die. And this is a real scenario for many countries, including India, that crossing this 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature and millions of people are dying on the street. What would happen to that country? What the government will do at that time? They will break away and deploy something that could be very dangerous because they are not ready for doing things. So what we are suggesting, even to the global science community, think about this scenario. We are not suggesting go and deploy it at this moment, the SAI or the likes, but get ready, do the mitigation, create the framework, engage in this. This is what we are proposing at the time. On the other hand, we are saying that, okay, why not use some lower risk, non-controversial surface albedo modification technique to give temporary relief to those people who need the most.
What's the situation in India when you present this kind of, let's just even say a strategy, a discussion for a policy debate? What's the pushback you get? Is there any pushback from expert communities, from other politicians, or anyone in India?
We have launched what is called as climate awareness campaign, and this includes 12 one-day workshop across the country each year, targeting about 2,000 people to train and involving the policymakers, members of the parliament, in the discussion and briefing them about the situation. What I find from the people that they're open to it. I have not seen any pushbacks so far. I have personally spoken with several members of the parliament and the politicians. They see this is needed and I have not seen any pushback from them. They understand the situation is very bad.
If you fast forward, let's say things are happening quite fast now in terms of the rate of acceleration of these issues in terms of the real world, and policy is lagging behind. If you fast forward, let's just say 5 or 10 years, whichever, how do you see the best case scenario for India in terms of your plan?
It takes time to change the mindset, to deploy. What we have started doing is an awareness campaign. So awareness, we think, is the first key, not only awareness at the policy level, but also at the grassroots level. So, and then we started building up on that, more intensifying this campaign, involving the policymakers as well as the policy influencers, academia, civil society. What would be the best case scenario by within 5 years? We assume that government of India, takes up a national cooling policy that involves proper allocation of funding for R&D for the high-risk climate interventions and get ready by 2035, in 10 years that get ready for deployment. And on the other hand, they start working with the state government and the city government to deploy low-cost surface albedo modifications type like rooftops and the likes, public building, so that they have lowered the temperature and reduce the impacts, mitigate the impacts of extreme heat weather, hot weather.
Do you foresee regional collaboration? You talked about being in close proximity to Bangladesh, for example. Is that something that might be considered?
Yes, we have been talking to Bangladesh people, have been talking for a long time. We are involved in not only the climate intervention, by the way, we are involved in rewilding, large-scale rewilding, and also involving the economy, improving the economy, regenerating economy through reforestation of the indigenous people. So Bangladesh also is part of it. We have been working. And we planned for workshops in Bangladesh in Dhaka University this January, but because of the situation right now is somewhat tenuous between these two countries, so we pulled out from that. So sometimes, we think that we'll be holding workshops in Bangladesh, and as well as Pakistan, things get better. Our goal is India right now because, we have a greater leverage in India, and I am from India, and I know people from India, and want to have India to lead this space from the global south, from the south mitigation. And we are hosting a climate conference inviting global south and as well as global north to come forward and take actions towards climate mitigation and climate interventions. Plan for that.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure what you're doing is going to spark a lot of debate and conversation around the world, because we've all got to find a sort of pathway to the future, and we've been dragging our feet, to say the least. So, yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to speak with you. Thank you.
If you are concerned about the future, then why not travel with me through every COP conference from COP21 in Paris to COP28 in Dubai by ordering my book, COP Out: How Governments Have Failed the People on Climate. In Cop Out, you'll gain insights into what is actually going on in these supposed world-saving conferences and how we have ended up in this dire era of dangerous consequences. You can order Cop Out via the link in the notes or on any online bookstore worldwide in paperback or audio version.